Hey folks, day 6 of Pastor's Devotional. I have changed seats again, and actually I've never sat in this seat that I'm sitting in right now. I'm sitting across my desk from myself. So you're watching this as if you would be sitting in my seat on the side of my desk that I usually sit on, and I'm sitting where you might be sitting if you came in and said, Pastor, I got a question about this, or I've been thinking about this, or I've been reading this Bible study or whatever. I got to tell you, I can't wait until this pandemic is over and we can have those conversations again. I so yearn to be able to be working in my office with my door open and people being able to just stick their head in and either say hi or stick their head in and say, hey, you got a minute? Which means, it never means a minute, right? It means you got a half an hour for a counseling session. Or, hey, I've been thinking about this. Can I share this with you? Whether it's lay people or whether it's the staff. I just can't wait for that to happen. If you're like me, there's just not enough human contact that happens virtually, and there's not enough opportunity for us to be in the same physical space, and even when we're in the same physical space and we don't live in the same household, you can't embrace one another, you can't really visit with one another. I look forward to you sitting in this chair when the pandemic's over, and to have a stream full of people coming in and out of my office. I'll never think of that as a distraction in the same way again. So that was a parable of its own, I think. All right, Matthew chapter 13 is where we've been all week, and we're going to finish up with one last parable. Verse 47, Matthew 13, verse 47. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was thrown into the sea and caught fish of every kind. When it was full, they drew it ashore, sat down, and put the good into baskets, but threw out the bad. So it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come out and separate the evil from the righteous and throw them into the furnace of fire, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. All right. So this parable is playing on something that all of them would have understood very well. So up around the Sea of Galilee. So first of all, let me start again. The Gospel of Matthew, the community that the Gospel of Matthew is written to, is communities up and around the Sea of Galilee. So the vast majority of people would have been employed with or by or some other way. The sea is what gave life to those people. Fishing is what gave life to those people. So when you're in the fishing village, you tell a story about fishing, and people understand that, right? When you're in the mountains, you tell a story about the way mountain people live or something, and people understand. When you're in the desert, well, you tell stories. So he's telling a fishing story. Everyone would have understood and would have immediately been able to sort of grasp what is happening here. So you've got these huge drag nets that you might tie between a couple boats, and you're moving and you're just sort of dragging the fish in, and then eventually you pull up the nets and you've caught all kinds of something. So this is not fishing like I'm going to use a particular lure that a particular kind of fish likes. Like I'm going after one kind of fish. No, it's a drag net. You're getting all of them. When you pull it in, you get the good with the bad. What does that mean? Well, I remember when I was in college and in Louisiana, my first roommate was Cajun as Cajun ever will be, and we went down to his family's farm one of the first weekends that I was there in college, and he was going to introduce me to a crawfish boil. And so we go out in the boat into the crawfish fields, and we're harvesting the crawfish, and he pulls up one of the sort of bins that the crawfish are on, and immediately he lets out a word. I'm not going to share what that word is because I would get in trouble, because we're sort of in a church atmosphere here. And he grabs a snake and he throws it. That in this crawfish pod was an incredibly poisonous snake. Now, I don't like high places, and I don't like snakes. Now, we were in a very low boat, so I wasn't afraid of heights, but he didn't tell me that there was a possibility that there was going to be snakes involved in this crawfish boil festival. And there are a couple more that came out in the exact same way as we were harvesting those crawfish on that day. That with the good, what we wanted, came some of the bad. Well, that's what's happening with the dragnet. That they're catching some fish that they know is good and they can sell at the market. There's other fish, maybe it's too small, so we got to throw that back. And there's other fish that just doesn't taste, it's not a good taste or whatever, so we got to throw that back. And so there's a process at which they have to go through all of the fish in the net to figure out. It's not a matter of just sweeping it up and taking it to market. Now they got to go through it all. Again, like I said earlier this week, some people would take this as a passage about judgment, and it's certainly a passage about judgment, but let us leave the judgment to God. Let us not worry about how we are to judge other people. Let us not spend any of our valuable spiritual time considering the best ways that we could be a judge. Let us not waste an ounce more of our energy figuring out who is more faithful than who, or figuring out how we are more faithful than anybody else. God will figure all that out someday in God's time, because that's God's job. What else could we figure out from this parable? Well, with the good comes the bad. And you sweep it up in the net, and it may look all good. It all comes from the same place. But some of it's not just, it's fruit that is not ready yet, or fruit that has been spoiled, or fruit that's been made bad in some way. And I can't help, as I read this, to remember who was living up in the villages around the Sea of Galilee. Well, it was a great mixture of people. There were people who were Jewish. There were people who were Jewish Christians. There were people who were Gentiles, and there were people who were Gentile Christians. So think of 4 different groups who all have very different views of what is right and wrong. Now let's just take out the Jews and the Gentiles. First of all, just take them out. Now we only have 2 groups. We have Jewish Christians and Gentile Christians. Jewish Christians who believe in order to be a Christian, you've got to live in all of these ways. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Gentile Christians who say, well, if you want to be a Christian, these are the things you have to do. 1, 2, 3, 4. And they're standing in opposition of one another. And what they're doing, the gospel tells us, what they're doing, the writers of the New Testament epistles tell us, what they're doing, the historians, both Christian and non-Christian of the day, tell us, is that they're lobbing stones at one another. We're better than you. Let's throw a few stones your way. No, we're better than you. Let's throw a few stones your way. And they're arguing it from the perspective of Christ has perfected us. That Christ has perfected me, that I'm the true follower of Christ, and therefore I'm better than you. No, I'm the true follower of Christ. Christ has perfected me. I'm better than you. And what they're doing is using their training and their knowledge and their religiosity as weapons to denounce the other. I could think of no better example of a dragnet sweeping up all kinds of things that are good, all kinds of things, but then we need to throw some of it back because it's not right. And what needed to be thrown back in that day around the Sea of Galilee in the Gospel of Matthew were people who were using their religiosity to condemn the other, using their religiosity to argue that they were better than the other, using their religion and their faith in Jesus to elevate themselves and to push others down. And what did Jesus say? No. The servant is the one who takes off his robe and ties it around his waist and bends down and cleanses the feet of the other. The best is the one who is willing to be the least. And so we all have to be careful. Being a religious person is a thing that we ought to take pride in. We just have to be careful that we don't take pride in it in such a way that we elevate ourselves in order to push down others. The best kind of Christian faith is the one that would be baked in humility so that we find ourselves at the bottom and others continually being lifted up because of what God has done in us and through us. May that be true of your life this week. God bless.